Today's daf we're going to be learning is Pesachim Samach Gimel. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the Mishnah, at the Braita, at the bottom, a few lines from the bottom of Samach Bet, Amud Bet, Tanya. Okay, I'll just refresh your memory. We saw the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, there was a case of, on the Mishnah on Samach Aleph. The Mishnah had said, if shachato le mulim v'la arelim, if you slaughter the sacrifice for the purpose of people, both who have a brit milah, circumcised, and are not circumcised, then it's kasher. Now, notice the order. It says mulim, arelim. That means you started off with what was good, the people who are circumcised. But then it says litmeim uletehorim kasher. But if you say impure, or not if, but if you say impure and pure, and in this case you started with the bad, it's also kasher. So now we're going to bring a braita which says differently. So according to the Tanakama or the Tana of our Mishnah, it doesn't make a difference the order. Right now, why would you think the order would make a difference? Because remember, Rabbi Meir says tfos lashon rishon. We go by the first thing somebody says, right? To just explain what's the issue with tfos lashon rishon. The logic behind Rabbi Meir is that if you say something and then you say something else, the assumption is that you say something else that's the opposite or different. What you really meant was to change your mind. However, okay, in the classic case where Rabbi Meir says it, hareza tmurat olah, harezo tmurat shlamim. This is a substitution for an olah. This is a substitution for a shlamim. So what you meant was, I wanted to be a substitution for an olah, but then you changed your mind and you said, I wanted to be a substitution for a shlamim. Right? You took one animal and then can't be both. So the assumption is you really meant to switch it to an olah. But the point is you already did it first as an olah. You meant to switch it to a shlamim. You already did it first as an olah, which means that you can't just change your mind about it. The kedusha is already there. What you did at the beginning counts, even though you really wanted to change it. Okay, whereas Rabbi Yossi says, no, we look at everything you said and then we try to assess, right? What you really tried to do was do two things and that can't work together. So you obviously meant nothing. Okay, so it depends obviously also on the situation, what two things you said and how they work in, and we saw different things about that. So comes the Braita and it says, Acherim omrim, others say, many times others is actually Rabbi Meir, and we're going to see here that others here is definitely Rabbi Meir. Higdim, or I can't remember now if all the opinions, but I think everyone agrees it's Rabbi Meir. So now, Acherim omrim, higdim mulim, acherim literally means others, okay? So others say, higdim mulim la'arelim, kasher, arelim lemulim, pasul, exactly the opposite of the Mishnah. If you start with arelim, then it's a problem. So if you started with mulim, circumcised people, it works. If you start with uncircumcised, it doesn't work. Maishna mulin la'arelim de kasher. So what's the reason? Mulin to arelim is kasher, de kula orla be'inan v'leika. So now, why is this that it works in one way, it doesn't work in the other? If you're going to say, if you said circumcised and uncircumcised, as long as, right, what makes it a problem? Kula or labinan. The only time it's a problem, this is like le'ochlav and lo le'ochlav. As long as you include people who can eat the sacrifice, then it works. But arelim lemulin nami should work the reverse also, because arelim lemulin also kula or labinan v'leika. You should need all of the orla, and there isn't kula orla, right? You don't have everyone isn't uncircumcised, and therefore it should work. So again, why do we make this distinction? What we're going to have now, and you can see this on the chart, is three different opinions about this, three different possible answers about how to understand this. So the first is lema kasavre acherim. Maybe we'll say that acherim hold. Okay, the first answer is going to be a little bit complicated. There's a lot of different parts to it, so patience. So now we're going to say like this. Maybe acherim hold that eina l'shchita ela levasof. What does this mean? There's two ways you could look at shchita. Shchita is a process. It takes it takes a little bit of time. You cut two different simanim, okay, to the trachea and the esophagus in order to slaughter the animal. So there's parts. Do we look at this as a process, as if it's made up of different parts? Okay, like the Tour de France. Okay, in the Tour de France, you do a bunch of different sections, and in the end, it's how you did in all the different sections. It's not all about the last moment of the race. It's about how you did in all the different segments. So like this, do we look at shchita as a bunch of different segments, and there's different things that happen in each segment? Or do we say, en l'shchita ela levasof, meaning the only thing that really matters is that one last moment when you finish the slaughtering. That's what counts. Okay, we'll see why this is relevant in a minute. Actually, quite complicated. Not everybody exactly understands why it's relevant, but we'll try to give some explanation. So number one, they hold Eina l'shchita ela basof. Then they hold like Rava. Da'amar Rava, adayin hi machloket. Rava says, this is another thing. We learned about the machloket that I referenced before, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, about do we go by the first thing, Lashon Rishon, according to Rabbi Meir, or do we go by Af Bidvar, Bigmar Dvarav, right? Even we look at the whole thing according to Rabbi Yossi. Now the question is that only in a case of Tmurat Olah, Tmurat Shlamim, where you can't make one animal a Tmurat Olah and a Tmurat Shlamim? It can't be a substitution for an Olah and a substitution for a Shlamim. But in a case where it theoretically could be two, like let's say you say, I want to bring this animal, I'm dedicating this animal, half for a shlamim, half for an olah. In that case, you actually could, because you could be designating the value of half of the animal. So would Rabbi Meir also agree in that case that we still go by the first thing you said, or maybe not? So according to Rava, adayin hi machloket, they still agree that in a case where you could say it meant both, like our statement. Mulim and arelim could be a real statement, because you could mean some are circumcised and some are not circumcised. But Rava says he still holds we go by Lashon Rishon. Therefore, hilkach, so now we follow. Higdim mulim la'arelim, mulim chayle, arelim lo chayle. So if you do the mulim before the arelim, now, what does this have to do with ein l'shchita ela basof? If you hold that it's made up of different parts of the shchita, so you could say that maybe part of it he did lemulin and part of it he did for arelim, and therefore maybe both would apply. But if you say there's only really one moment and we're just looking at that one slice in time when the slice, no pun intended, when you slice off, right, and you're finished with the last slice of the slaughter. So if you say that, then we look and we say, Rabbi Meir, classic Rabbi Meir. When we look at what you did, you said arelim and mulim, we go by the first thing you said. So if you said mulim, circumcised people first, we're going to say it works. If you said uncircumcised people first, then it's not going to work. So again, it has to be a combination of ein l'shchita ela basof, because then we just look at it with one perspective of what did you say overall, rather than if it's different, made up of different pieces, then each piece, at one point you said mulim, at one point you said arelim, and then the arelim would actually have been valid, and then you're going to have a totally invalid slaughter, because it doesn't matter when you said arelim, we're going to look at each as its own slice. So again, therefore, higdim mulim la'arelim, mulim chayle, arelim lo chayle, but higdim arelim the mulim, but if the arelim came first, then arelim chayle, mulim lo chayle, then you're going to have a problem, because then we're going to say we go by the first thing you said, which is arelim. Mulin, not. Arelim are uncircumcised. If you slaughter for the purpose of uncircumcised people, no good. So that's why Acherim make this distinction. So that's the first answer to explaining Acherim's opinion, why Mulim Arelim works and Arelim Mulim doesn't work. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, lo, I disagree with you. Le'olam kasavre Acherim yeshna l'shchita mitchila vad sof. He says, no, in fact, those others who we're talking about, they actually hold Shchita, which is Rabbi Meir again, is Shchita is on mitchila vad sof. It's a process. It's looked at as different parts. So what's our case here? Kigon shegamar belibo litravayu bein lemulim bein la'arelim. The case is where you intended really for both, whether, right, you intended both for circumcised and uncircumcised people that would eat it. I guess you didn't know that uncircumcised people can't eat it. V'hutzi bepiv, but what you said was la'arelim. V'lo hispik lomar lemulin ad shenigmara shchita ba'arelim. What happened? You finished slaughtering, and the first thing you started saying, I'm doing this la'arelim. By the time you got to the word mulim, you were done with your shchita. You're finished. So now it's not going to be useful. Whatever you say is irrelevant, or is it? That's going to be the debate between Rabbi Meir and the Tanna Kama of our Mishnah. So what's the debate here? And this is the root of their machloket, their debate. You don't need your mouth and your heart to be the same, which means we go by what you said. It doesn't matter that you were thinking otherwise, right? I was thinking to say arelim and mulim, uncircumcised and circumcised, but the only thing that came out of my mouth before the shechita was done was uncircumcised. A second later, or a minute later, a few seconds later, when the shechita was already finished, I said limulim, for circumcised, but it's too late. We don't care if I didn't mean to say only arelim. That's what came out. That's what happened. But the rabbis held, no, if we go by what your intent is, your heart and your words without what you intended are useless. So if you said circumcised and you meant to say also, I'm sorry, you said uncircumcised and you meant to also say circumcised, it just didn't come out in time. So in that case, we're going to say it's an issue. Okay. So then we're going to say, we assume you mean, in that case, we're going to assume you mean both. If you mean both, then what? Then it's going to actually be effective. Okay. And that's why the rabbis think it's effective and Rabbi Meir doesn't. So 2 answers so far. The structure is going to be 3 answers, but we're going to have a question on this second answer. So now they say, wait a minute. Is it really true that Rabbi Meir holds piva libo shavim, that you don't need piva libo shavim? We're going to show, it was very nice to make up this, to say this theory, but the theory doesn't hold water because, let's see, it's uriminu, that contradicts a different source. It says, hamitzkaven lomar truma va'amar ma'aser. You meant to say truma, but instead the word ma'aser came out of your mouth. Ma'aser va'amar truma, or you said this is ma'aser and you really meant to say truma. Remember, one goes to the Kohen, one goes to the Levi. There's different levels of sanctity, right? So which one is it going to be? Oh, she'eni nichnas labayitze v'amar lizeh. I make a vow that I am never going into your house. But instead of saying your house, I accidentally said someone else's house. Okay, I said the wrong thing. Came out of my mouth wrong. She'eni nehene lizeh v'amar lizeh. It almost sounds like a Freudian slip maybe, right? I want to say, I will not benefit. I'm vowing I'm not going to get benefit from this person, but I said the wrong person. Lo amar klum. It's an irrelevant statement. Whatever you said, totally irrelevant. Ajihu piv v'libo shavim. Okay, until you have a case where piv v'libo shavim, meaning it all has to even out. Okay, it has to be what you meant is what you said. If you didn't do that, it's not valid. So here you see that Rabbi Meir does need piv v'libo shavim. Your heart and your words have to be in the same place. So forget that. We can't possibly say that's Rabbi Meir. Ela amar Abaye. So 3rd possibility. Again, let's just go back. First possibility was, okay, you can see this charted out. Shechita is only at the end, and we take into consideration, this is classic Rabbi Meir, af b'lashon rishon, because it's that one moment. We look back at everything and we say, okay, so what was it? He said 2 things, we go by the first. And that's why only if he said circumcised first, it's going to be effective and not the other way around. The second is to say that Rabbi Meir holds you don't need piv v'libo shavim. And if the case was where he said, it's a different case than the first one, according to this interpretation, you said la'arelim for non-circumcised people, and you didn't get around yet to saying the word for circumcised until it was already, the shechita was finished. So that's the second option, which we just rejected. Ela amar Abaye, 3rd option. Reisha da'amar siman rishon lemulin v'siman sheni af la'arelim. What I said is that when you slaughter, there's 2 simanim you have to cut, trachea and the esophagus. So let's say, so there's 2 parts to shechita. So in the first part, you said lemulin for circumcised. The second part, you said af la'arelim, even for uncircumcised, which meant that the first one you did for mulim, that's good. The second one you said circumcised and uncircumcised, that's also good. So that works. You included also circumcised people. So we're going to look at each siman as a separate unit. So as long as circumcised people were included, then you're fine. The second case, where we start with arelim, in which they have a machloket, where Rabbi Meir says it's not good, and the rabbis say it is good, so what's the case? You said, the first siman I'm slaughtering for uncircumcised people. The second one I'm slaughtering for circumcised people. So, now when you said uncircumcised on one of the simanim, you didn't include circumcised people. All you said was uncircumcised, and you didn't include any circumcised people. So what's the issue here? Well, this is a big issue, big debate in another place. Rabbi Meir, this whole page mentions lots of different machlokot that come up, particularly in Masechet Zvachim, or other korbanot related Masechtot, like the Tmura case. Rabbi Meir l'ta'ameh da'amar mefaglin b'chatzi matiyah. what does this mean? There's a lot of words we don't yet know what they are. Mifaglim means pigul. We've talked about that. Pigul is when you have the wrong intent when you're doing a sacrifice. Okay, yeah, so that's number one. You know what pigul is now? And here we really mean we use pigul in a general sense. Any sort of intention that messes up your sacrifice, like, for example, saying, I'm doing this for uncircumcised people. Now, in this case, you took shchita. We split shchita into two. There's two parts to shchita. Half is one siman and half is the other siman. So now, remember, right, the trachea and the esophagus. So now we have an issue here. We have two parts of shchita. Shchita is called a matir. What does a matir mean? Well, pigul only applies when you have an incorrect thought, when it's one of the avodot, one of the actions that actually permits something else. What does that mean? So without shchita, you can't sprinkle the blood. So shchita enables zrika, the sprinkling of the blood. So that's a matir because it allows you to be able to sprinkle the blood. Or it allows you to eat the meat, right? Without shchita, you can't eat the meat. Sprinkling the blood is also a matir because by sprinkling the blood, you get atonement. Once you get atonement, you can then eat the meat. So those are called matirs. Now, pigul only applies in those matir areas, okay? In the avoda of, right? So in the avoda of shchita, you could be mefagel. But what if, are you mefaglin b'chatzi matir? What if you have a pigul, a wrong intent in half of the matir, meaning only one of the simanim of the shchita, of the slaughtering. So if you say, like Rabbi Meir, mifaglim b'chatzi matir, you can mess things up with only half of the matir, half of the action. So therefore, we're going to say that's pigul because in one of the simanim, you had intent only for arelim. But Rabbanan, but the rabbis think it doesn't matter what direction you go in, even if, again, now we're understanding the case not the way we did originally. What we mean, again, arelim mulim or mulim arelim is each one was while you slaughtered a different siman of the animal, a different part of the animals, right, a different pipe. So if that's the case, the rabbis say there's no such thing as pigul in half a matir. So it doesn't matter if the order is arel ma mulim or mulim arelim. Either which way, you messed up only in half, that doesn't mess you up. As long as part of it was done correctly, there's no messed up machshava, and that's why they think it's good. Whereas Rabbi Meir again says, if you say mulim, and then the second one was arelim, but again, it's not the simple reading. It's mulim and even arelim on the second. Even arelim included the mulim. But in the second case, you did arelim and then mulim, which means the arelim didn't include the mulim at all, meaning that all it said was uncircumcised, and that's going to be a problem. Okay, with that, we finish that section. We're now moving on to the next mission. We're now talking about the famous pasuk of Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, which says you can't slaughter with chametz the blood of my sacrifices. The end of that verse we're going to see soon. Lo yalin laboker zevach Chag HaPesach, and you can't leave over for the morning the sacrifice of Chag HaPesach, of the holiday of Pesach. So one thing to notice is it says Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, the blood of my sacrifice, but it doesn't specifically say the korban Pesach. So there's going to be a machloket in the Mishnah about who. So first of all, the topic of this is you cannot have chametz while you're doing the sacrifice. Okay. So now, question is, who is this applied to? Okay, who can't have chametz? Where does the chametz have to be for it to be a problem? Does it have to be with the person? What if it's in your house back at home? Okay, what about the person who slaughters the animal? What about if it's all the people who are in the group? What if it's the Kohen who's doing the avoda in the temple? Who is this applied to? Now, what other questions? Is it just for the Korban Pesach? It doesn't specifically say. Maybe it's other sacrifices that you do on Erev Pesach, or maybe all of the Pesach holiday. So the Mishnah is going to have a machloket about this. Starts off with Tanakama, Hashochet et HaPesach al hachametz over below taseh. Anyone who slaughters the Korban Pesach while they have chametz in their possession is a problem. Again, they don't exactly say where in your possession. We'll get to that later. Okay, and that's a lo taseh. That means you're going to get lashes for it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afa Tamid. Rabbi Yehuda says, wait, there's another sacrifice we do in the afternoon, the Korban Tamid. That one also is going to be a problem. Rabbi Shimon Omer HaPesach ba'arba'asar lishmo chayav v'shelo lishmo patur. Shimon says, look at the verse. The verse says, don't slaughter. Now, what's called slaughtering? When you slaughter the animal the proper way. Let's say it's the 14th. We already talked about this. And I take my animal that was designated for the Korban Pesach and I slaughter it l'shem shlamim. That's a classic case, shelo lishma. If you do it shelo lishma, it's disqualified. If it's disqualified, then that's not called shchita, and then you're actually in good shape. You didn't transgress. I mean, you're not in good shape because you did one problem, but you resolved a different problem, which is even if you have chametz, doesn't matter because that's not called tishchat. You didn't slaughter a sacrifice properly. It was disqualified. So he says, if you do it lishmo, you're going to be obligated. If it's shelo lishmo, you're going to be patur. So that's about the Korban Pesach. Then he continues and says, ushar kol hazvachim, but any other sacrifice, bein lishman, bein shelo lishman, patur. But all the other sacrifices, other than a korban chatat, that's one exception, which he's going to say at the end, whether you do it lishma or shelo lishma, you're going to be exempt. Okay? Because why? Actually, I shouldn't say the chatat yet. The chatat's going to come in later. All the other sacrifices, he says right now, this does not apply on the 14th to any other sacrifices, presumably because, right, let me just see for a minute if Rashi talks about this, shar kol hazvachim, right, that you did after chatzot, even though they are ksherim, okay, you're patur, right, the Gemara is going to explain, because the point is that you're not really obligated in any other sacrifice. Remember, you're not supposed to bring sacrifices in the afternoon, remember? Unless you're Mechusar Kippurim, we'll talk about that later. Okay, we already talked about that one in the past, and we're going to get back to that again. But then he says, Bamoed, but when it's on Pesach itself, when theoretically you could bring all different kinds of sacrifices, so then, Lishmo Patur, if you do your animal that was supposed to be for the Korban Pesach and you do it after the 14th, and you're now on the holiday of Pesach, which we said, if you do it shelo lishma, it's a shlamim. So then you're going to be, if you take it shelo lishmo, it's going to be disqualified. Sorry, I said it wrong. If you do it lishmo, you do it l'shem korban pesach. You do it for the intent of doing a korban pesach, which you can't because it's not your dalit anymore, the 14th, then you're exempt because that's not slaughtering at all. If you do it shelo lishmo, then it's going to be a shlamim because again, the default, right? Pesach is really just a type of shlamim. So if it's not the day of Pesach, we're going to just call that, we're going to say, if you did it l'shem shlamim, that's fine. Then you'll be obligated if you have chametz. Because remember, if it's a good sacrifice, this is his rule basically, Rabbi Shimon. It's a good sacrifice, then you're going to be obligated if you have chametz. If it's not a valid sacrifice, then you're not going to be obligated. Ushar kol hazvachim, any other sacrifices during the week of Pesach, bein lishman, bein shelo lishman, chayav. Everything else you're also going to be obligated, whether it's lishma or whether it's shelo lishma, because again, what did we say? Anything you do shelo lishma, I talked about this in the introduction to this parak, to this chapter, anything you do with the wrong intent is a valid sacrifice, but you didn't fulfill your obligation, okay? Other than Pesach shelo lishma and chatat. If you do Pesach shelo lishma on your dalid, and a korban chatat, a sin offering that you do shelo lishma. But all the others, you still sacrifice them. You just didn't fulfill your obligation of what you were supposed to, and you'll have to bring an additional sacrifice. But since it's a good sacrifice, so therefore, chayav, you'll be obligated because he views this verse, lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, as any sacrifice the whole week of Pesach. Okay, Tanakama said it's only on your Dalit and it's only the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda said it's only on your Dalit and it's only the Korban Tamid. Rabbi Shimon adds it's all these other sacrifices that you can possibly bring the whole holiday of Pesach. Other than the sin offering, which is invalid if you did it for the wrong. You say, I'm bringing this for an ola, when really you had already designated it for a sin offering, then it's also going to be no good. And if it's no good, then you're not obligated for having chametz because that's not shchita, that's not slaughtering. So now we're going to get to the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. La'olam eino chayav, ad sheheh, you're not going to be obligated until, okay, it's basically describing who is obligated. Chametz l'shochet, there has to be chametz either for the one who slaughtered, o lazorek, okay, or for the Kohen who's sprinkling the blood, if any of them have chametz, o le'echam ibnei chabura, or if anybody in the group of people who are registered for this animal have chametz, it's a problem. Va'ad sheyehei imo ba'azara. But now we learn, wait a minute, we thought this was if you have chametz even at home. According to this opinion, Rish Lakish, you have to have it with you in the azara, in the temple and in the azara. That's where they did the sacrifice, okay, the more inner area. okay, where women can't go anymore, right beyond the Ezrat Nashim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afal Pisha Einimo Ba'azara. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if it's not with you in the Azara. So first of all, the one thing to realize is, this doesn't mean if I'm slaughtering an animal and I happen to see chametz in the Azara, it's not mine, it's not the person, the Kohen who's doing the other parts, it's not anyone who's registered for this korban, it doesn't matter, nothing wrong with that. The issue is, if it's mine, or right, I'm the shochet, or I'm the zorek, or right, or any of the Kohen doing any of the avodah, any of the jobs for this korban, or I'm one of the people registered, then it will be a problem. But only if I have the food with me in the Azara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afal Pi She'eini Mo Ba'azara. Rabbi Yochanan says, wait, even if you don't have food, meaning if I have food at home, it's a problem. Okay, that's what we thought originally when we talked about this verse a while back. What's the root of this machloket? Ilema, if you want to say, Be'al B'samuch. Okay, we're going to have a bunch of suggestions, reject them, and then come back and explain which one. Be'al B'samuch kamiflage. It says, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Does al mean next to, when it's here physically? Don't do your sacrifice while there's chametz right nearby. So if you say al means right next to you, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and that's why it says it has to be there. For Rabbi Yochanan savar lo be'inan al b'samuch, you don't need al to be next to. But there'd be no reason for us to teach us this machloket, because we already know this from a different machloket. What's the different machloket? Ditnan. Hashochet todah lifnim v'lachma chutz lechoma. Korban todah came with bread. And it says there, let's see if Rashi quotes the verse. It says, Al zevach hatodah chalot. You have to bring on the zevach hatodah. Okay, let me see if it says the whole verse here. Right. Ve'im al todah yakrivenu. If you're going to bring a korban todah, v'hikriv, that's a thanks offering. V'hikriv al zevach hatodah. You're supposed to bring al zevach hatodah. Al literally means on. Does on mean next to? You're supposed to bring with it. Okay, some of it means with. We'll see. You're supposed to bring chalot matzot. You're supposed to bring these loaves. We talked about these 40 loaves of the thanks bread. So now, the question is, what if you slaughter the todah inside, right, where you're supposed to, in the area by where they do all the slaughtering, v'lachma chutz lechoma, but the bread is outside the walls. We'll have to see which walls exactly we mean. Lo kidesh alechem. The bread does not become sanctified. Usually what happens is, when you slaughter the meat, the bread that you designated becomes sanctified. In this case, because it says al, and the bread was far away, it doesn't become sanctified. So the Gemara asks, "My chutz lechoma." What does it mean outside the choma? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, chutz lechomat Beit Pagi. Beit Pagi was the border around Jerusalem. So Rabbi Yochanan thinks it doesn't have to be so close. It just has to be within the boundaries of Jerusalem. That's enough. Only if it's outside the walls of Jerusalem do the breads not become sanctified, because they think al, just like we saw before, means could be far away. It doesn't mean literally right nearby. But if it's outside the walls of the Azara, the inner area there in the temple, Kaddish, then it's fine. But lo be'inan al b'samuch, you don't need al to be right next to. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish omer, afilu chutz l'chomat Azara lo Kaddish. Even if it's outside the walls of the Azara, it's also not sanctified, because al be'inan al b'samuch. It has to be really there in the Azara with you. So if you're going to say that the al, by our case, is al, is it b'samuch or not b'samuch, with the chametz and the shechting, having chametz have to be right there, we already know that from somewhere else. They wouldn't need to say it. So let's try option number 2. This is very famous. If I give a warning, but I can't warn you, sometimes I can warn you, you're about to kill somebody, and I say, if you kill someone, you're going to get, we're going to get the death penalty. Do you know that? And you say, yes, I know that. And I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. Then that's a good warning. Now, in Jewish law, you can't punish unless you've warned someone and they accept your warning. So what if you have a case where you can't warn for sure? Meaning, right, imagine if I tell you, do you know that, I can't think of an example right now, but if I tell you something might be the case, it might be you're going to be doing something wrong. You won't take it as seriously, right? So that's what we're going to talk about, hatra'at safek. Is that a valid warning or not? If you're about to stand there and murder someone, so you know exactly, and then a second later you go and you murder them, right? But if I warn you about something and then it's not clear whether it's really a problem or not. Okay. And you're not sure. There's like a 50-50 chance that maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. And that maybe you're going to do something wrong. Maybe you're not going to do something wrong. You won't take me seriously. And maybe that's not a valid warning. The warning has to be that you knew full well that what you were about to do was 100% wrong. Here, it's not really. So there's a debate about Hatra'at Safek. So let's see. What's the debate here? If I say you're about to slaughter this animal and you have chametz at home. So if I say, do you know that if you slaughter this animal with your chametz at home, you're going to get lashes? And you say, I know and I don't care. Well, that's really only a Hatra'at Safek. Why? Because nobody knows what the status of that bread is. If you left it in your house, maybe someone ate it. Maybe you don't really have bread anymore. Maybe animals came into your house and ate whatever was left. So you don't really know that you have chametz. So that's a Hatra'at Safek. Now, if we say, Safek means doubt, and Hatra'ah is warning. If we say that we count that as a valid warning, then we can punish you for this. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. I don't care if your chametz is far away. That works. Rish Lakish says, no, that doesn't work because maybe you think the chametz really isn't there. So if you're going to say that's the issue, but they also have a debate about this elsewhere. Again, this is something we know. You don't need to tell us this. This is one of the classic examples of Hatra'at Safek. You swear that I'm going to eat this loaf today. Now, the day passes and you didn't eat it. Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish ta'amrei travayu eino lokeh. They both say you don't get lashes, but each one for different reasons. Rabbi Yochanan amar eino lokeh mishum dehave le'lav she'en bo ma'aseh. There's no action associated with this, and therefore, because what you do wrong, you didn't eat it. You didn't do anything. A lav she'en bo ma'aseh, you don't get lashes for. So he says, right? The lav she'en bo ma'aseh, ein kol lav she'en bo ma'aseh. Any lav, there's a famous halacha. We'll see that Rish Lakish actually disagrees with it. Any negative commandment that doesn't have an action associated with it, you don't get lashes for. Aval hatra'at safek shma hatra'ah. Okay, now the reason you don't get lashes, according to him, is because it's a lav she'en bo ma'aseh. But he doesn't bother him the issue of Hatra'at Safek. Now, why is this Hatra'at Safek? Well, when am I going to warn you? Let's say it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. You swear you're not going to eat this kikar. So when would I warn you? I warn you right then. I say, listen, do you know that if you don't eat that, you swear that you're going to eat it. I say to you, do you know that if you swear like that and you don't eat it, you're going to be obligated for not fulfilling your vow? And then you say, yeah, I know that. I'm going to eat it. Don't worry. Now, what happens? Later in the day, you forget. Now, you'll say, oh, I didn't realize, right? But I warned you. But I warned you 5 hours ago. Who remembered, right? By the end of the day about this vow, and I wasn't warned. And the whole idea of warning is that we want to make sure that you really knew what you were doing and it was intentional. We have no way to know, is this intentional or not? So therefore, you can always say, didn't remember, I forgot, right? I didn't do this on purpose. So someone would have to warn you kind of at every moment in the day, or maybe at the very last second of the day, maybe one could say, but even that, right? It's not a great, right? It's not going to really work. Aval, okay, so now Rish Lakish, so now Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, he says Eino Lokeh for a different reason. And now we're going to see. He says, no, the reason why it doesn't, right? Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan thinks, I don't care this Hatra'at Safek. You still could get lashes for that. It's just because it's lav she'en bo ma'aseh. It has no action. Rish Lakish says the exact opposite. The reason you don't get lashes is because havale hatra'at safek, and hatra'at safek lo shma hatra'at. That's not a good warning. That's why you're not getting lashes. Aval lav she'en bo ma'aseh lo kina lav. But if it was a negative commandment without an action, that aspect of it, you do get lashes for that. He disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan about that. So in general, we still say this is the same problem. We tried to suggest different reasons that either they argue al b'samuch, or they argue Hatra'at Safek. Both of those we know from different cases, so you wouldn't need to say it here. So comes the Gemara and says, Amrei la'olam be'al b'samuch kamiflei. Let's go back to answer number one. That really is the source of debate. Why don't we learn it from the Korban Todah, from the thanks offering? That's a good reason. Utzricha, you need it in both. Even though you said it there, you wouldn't necessarily be able to learn to our case. Why? If you just had it by chametz, you would have said, there Rabbi Yochanan doesn't require the bread to be near, Mishum di isulhu v'chol hecha di ite. What's the issue here? The issue is that you're bringing your korban Pesach, thinking I'm so great because I'm bringing a korban, but you're doing something forbidden. You're leaving chametz in your house. I don't care if the chametz isn't here. You're doing something forbidden. We don't care whether it's here or not here. But when it comes to whether your bread becomes sanctified for this sacrifice, first of all, there's no isser about it. There's no prohibition. You're not doing anything wrong. The point is, for bread, the only way it can become sanctified is if it's physically here. If it's not physically here, it's not going to become sanctified. That has nothing to do with, am I obligated because I did something, right? And there, the distance is not a factor. In Kedusha, right, the distance could be a factor, and maybe maybe there he would think that the bread actually needs to be there in order to become sanctified. Because if it's inside, it will become sanctified. And if it's outside that area, lo kaddish, maybe it won't be. And here's an example. A kli sharet is, we talked about it, let's say you take your dough that you're making for the meal offering. You put it in the bowl. That bowl is if it's a kli sharet, one of the sanctified bowls in the temple, it makes it sanctified. Now, how does it make it sanctified? Physically, it has to be in the bowl to make it sanctified. So likewise, it has to be nearby the breads. Otherwise, how can they be? You transfer sanctity by being there physically. Now, the logic is going to go the reverse here, the same logic, but flipped. If you're going to say linya mikdash lechem, that just by the bread, havamin, I would have thought behach amar b'shimon ben Lakish to be in an al b'samuch. In that case, you need al b'samuch. Di ite gavai kaddish ilo lo kaddish. If you just have the machloket by the breads, you would think only there it has to be close according to Rish Lakish. But linyan chametz, but when it comes to chametz, modeh le Rabbi Yochanan de lo be in an al b'samuch. But there you would say you don't really need al b'samuch. Di surahu v'chol hecha di ite. Exactly the logic we said before. Maybe Rish Lakish would say, when it comes to the bread, wherever you have the bread, it's a problem, as we saw before. So tzricha. That's why you needed to know that they argue about al b'samuch also when it comes to chametz b'Pesach, and that's why they told us this machloket. By minei Rav Oshai Rabbi Ami, he asked the following question: Ein lo l'shochet v'yesh lo le'echad b'nei chabura mahu. What if the shochet doesn't have any chametz, but one of the b'nei chabura have chametz, one of the people in the group? Amarle, miktiv lo tishchat al chametzcha, doesn't say don't slaughter on your chametz. Lo tishchat al chametz ktiv, which means on any chametz, even if it's not you who has the chametz, but it's one of the people in the group. Amarle, yihachi. So now they ask this question. So you just say, if I'm slaughtering the korban pesach and I see some chametz right in front of me and it belongs to some guy who lives on the other end of the world, it's also going to be a problem? Amarle, he says, no, that's not going to be a problem, but that's for a different reason. We already discussed this. No, but here they're going to give a reason why that's not a problem. Amarle, we didn't discuss this yet, why it is. Lo tishchat v'lo yalin. That's the verse I quoted you in the very beginning. It says, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Sorry, lo tishchat, al chametz dam zivchi. V'lo yalin laboker zevach chag pesach. And you can't leave over to the morning the zevach chag pesach. So what are they darshan from this? Lo tishchat al chametz, hanach dekaime alei mishum lo yalin. Who's included in the lo tishchat al chametz? The ones who can't leave it over till the morning. Those are the people who have to eat it, right? The people who are the minuyim, not people who aren't connected with this korban at all. Amar Rav Papa adds another thing we can derive from this verse. Hilkach kohen hamaktir et hachelev. The kohen who's in charge of burning the fats that you're supposed to burn from that sacrifice on the altar, over below ta'aseho il v'yeshno bechlal halanat imurim. He's also responsible. Okay, he's also going to get lashes for this if he has chametz, right? Because he's part of the lo talin. He also can't leave over. There's parts that can't be left over because you have to eat them, and there's parts that can't be left over because they have to be burned. So the kohen who's involved in the burning of the parts on the altar also is involved in this. This actually matches what we saw before. But it's not just, what's interesting is until that, we thought the kohen who's bothering with the zrika and the main avodot of the korban, not necessarily one who's dealing with the burning of the parts after, because that's already always, we said that's secondary. It's not as important, that part. So yet he's still part of this whole thing. Tanya Kavatei de Rav Papa, here's a bright to prove. Hashochet et pesach ala chametz, over below taseh. So one who slaughters it with chametz, right? Meaning again, that somebody owns chametz is over on a lo taseh. It's forbidden, negative commandment. You have to get lashes. Matai, when is that? Bizman shehula shochet ola zorek olecha mibnei chabura, right? Whether he has, or the one who sprinkles the blood, or anyone in the group. If you have, right, for someone who's across, if there's bread in front of you, but it doesn't belong to any of those people, but some random person, no problem. Here's the part of the Braita that proves Rav Papa, even the one who burns it is going to be obligated. Aval, but there's an exception. Here I said we get back to this. What if you're a mechusar kippurim? Remember, there was one exception. We talked in the Mishnah that it's only on Erev Pesach according to Tanakama, and then according to the second opinion, which was Rabbi Yehuda, that it's only the Pesach or the Korban Tamid that are brought that afternoon. But nothing else is brought that afternoon. But there is one other thing that's brought. Remember, if you're a mechusar kippurim and you're left over, and according to some of the interpretation, it was only if you had a chatata oaf to bring, where you don't have to burn anything on the altar, you just have to sprinkle the blood. So if you're moleket oaf ba'asal, eino over below klum. Okay, there you're not going to be obligated for anything if you do that. Okay, so we're going to stop here for today. That was the bright to the proof of Papa, and then okay, so he says that's not what the basic point about this molikata oaf. That's not part of, maybe because it's hashochet, but that's not part of the prohibition. Okay, that sacrifice is on the outs. Okay, we'll see about who this matches and what it is. We'll get back to that later, and we'll start with the contradiction in tomorrow's class. Okay, so we'll finish here. Shabbat shalom, Shavua tov to everyone.